Kelly Denton-Borhaug. And do I pronounce that right?
Yes,
Good deal.
I would love to hear from Harvey too about maybe I can ask both of you this
Yeah.
question. What do you remember about Memorial Day from before you were drafted?
You want to go ahead, Harvey? Or you want me to go ahead?
Well, well, you were drafted. I was in Navy ROTC in
Okay,
college,
that's right.
but I joined during one of those rare hiatuses in the U.S. where we were not at war.
Okay.
I wasn't prepared
Oh,
for that. But you
okay.
know, the only time I really thought of Memorial Day as anything serious is if someone I knew had a family member, like a father or grandfather, who had died in a war.
Uh-huh.
And, I could see that would be an emotional day for them.
Hmm.
How hard would that be when all you're seeing on TV is Memorial Day sales and Memorial Day cookouts or patriotic stuff, which has nothing to do with Memorial Day. But
Hmm.
my feelings and thinking about Memorial Day have changed a lot just in the last few years, since I moved from Nashville to Charleston, South Carolina, which, as a lot of people know, was the epicenter of the slave trade in North America. And uh, and I found out that uh, Charleston also was the site of the first Memorial Day. And I
Oh,
don't know how many people are aware of that. There's actually a historical marker at this place called Hampton Park, which during the Civil War was a was converted into a prison for Union soldiers. By the end of the Civil War, there was a mass graveyard on that property. 250 Union soldiers were buried, some of them black soldiers.
wow.
And on May the 1st of 1865, the end of the Civil War, um, thousands of enslaved people had been freed, and actually, and there were a lot of uh, formerly enslaved people not that far away in Beaufort, South Carolina, which is about 2 hours from Charleston, who had been freed for like since 1862 because the Federals people took over that area,
Hmm.
and and they had thousands of enslaved people working rice plantations and indigo plantations and things. And these people, uh, they started their own, uh, new lives.
Hmm.
They had someone who had been a slave who had made some money and granted land, and they had a school. They got teachers to come down from New
Hmm.
So they were way ahead of the pack, and so they contributed to this idea of having a Memorial Day. The 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 black clergy in the area, and blacks who had been able to be freed just from buying their way freedom or whatever, they wanted to do something to honor these Union soldiers, and so they staged this event on May 1st, 1865. Barely 2 weeks after Lincoln's assassination.
Hmm.
They had this parade on the grounds led by school children from these freedmen schools down in Beaufort, South Carolina, who came up for it. And they said the crowd was in the thousands. And they just paraded around this area. And there were clergy, there were members of various Union brigades and Union colored infantry brigades. And this historical marker, explains all that and says, this was the first observance and celebration of what would become Memorial Day. So, I was just taken by that.
Yeah, that's
And
powerful.
and because of that, I went to Beaufort last year for Memorial Day, Beaufort, South Carolina.
Mm.
And my daughter, Suzanne, who's a millennial, came with me. And I didn't know what to expect because South Carolina's Trump country, you know? And we saw our fair share of Trump signs and bumper stickers on our way down there. So I thought, well, we've got our Veterans for Peace shirts, and how are people going to react? And I thought, well, let's just go and find out. And we just found where the parade route was, and we were, on the side of the road. And I noticed that most of the uh, citizens who were along the side of the road were African American, and that made me feel safer. So, and everyone was very friendly and
Mm.
asked me where we're from, and they, oh, you came all this way, but really, I had to find a real Memorial Day uh,
Mm. Yeah,
observance. Even
yeah.
Charleston, all they had was a concert in that same park, but it was more like patriotism. It wasn't, uh,
Mm.
it wasn't to me, it was not appropriate to Memorial Day.
Ah.
And I met, well, the first thing that happened was I heard someone behind me saying, "Can I take a picture of your t-shirt?" And it was a young woman and her husband and their two kids, a white couple. And I have this Veterans of Peace t-shirt, and on the back of it says, "I hate war as only a soldier." I don't know if you're familiar with that quote from Eisenhower, as
Mm.
only a soldier who has lived it,
Ah. Mm.
experienced its brutality, its futility, its barbarity.
Mm. Mm.
Uh, and they were really taken by that. And we talked about Veterans for Peace and what we were doing, and they were all interested in it. So we felt really good about that. And
Mm.
before long, we thought that was, going to be something we could hang our hat on for the rest of the day. Then we met another couple, older, probably in their 60s, and the woman started asking me about Veterans for Peace. And she told me that she had been uh, involved with a local production of a play called A Piece of My Heart. And I don't know if you've ever heard of that play. Well, it's a play based on a book by this fellow Keith Walker, who interviewed 26 Vietnam veteran nurses
Mm.
and their experiences. And you talk about moral injury. This is full of moral injury. And and this woman, Shirley Laura, made it into a play. And it I forget when it first came out. Listen, maybe the 80s or something. But I found out that play's been all over. It's even been to South Africa. It's been widely acclaimed. And so we talked about that. I interviewed her for the show, and during that time, she told me she had a brother. I asked her if she had any veterans in the family or if she was a veteran. She said, "Well, my brother, and he died at age 53 from Agent Orange,
Oh my.
and he'd been in Vietnam as a Marine." So
Mm.
it was really moving, to have these experiences. Then she and her husband invited Suzanne and I over to their house, which was not far, so she could show me the poster from the play and the book that it was based on. And we had a wonderful conversation. She made tea and we had cookies and all this stuff. And uh, and then she said, "Well, you want to get down to the cemetery because they'll be having the program down there," which wasn't that far. It's that they have a national cemetery there in Beaufort that's primarily colored troops, primarily Civil War uh, veterans. And at the entrance to this cemetery, there's this tower, kind of in the same shape as like the Washington Monument, maybe about 25 feet high, and it's inscribed uh, to, to the memory of those uh, who fought to save American freedom against the Great Rebellion, and which was the Confederates, the Great Rebellion.
Oh my.
Yeah. So, we have a national cemetery in Nashville that has how many, 900 or so colored troops buried there, Jim? But
Yeah,
there's
if
nothing like that, you
you
know.
can find them. So,
But and this monument was actually put in place in 1880 something. But it was like I was in a dream, I was just seeing all this stuff that I never thought I would see. And the actual program was very somber and beautiful. They had a small band, a Marine band, that just played an instrumental version of America the Beautiful, but extremely slow. It almost sounded like a dirge, it was just so moving.
Right,
And then they
right.
had speakers, and once the speakers started, some of them were uh, politicians. Most of them were white, so we didn't stick around for that part. But going home, I just thought about that a lot and thought I never realized that Memorial Day was so just organically rooted to the Civil War.
Oh yeah,
mm,
absolutely,
Yeah,
absolutely.
and yeah, and
Huh.
to me, a lot of the pathology we have in this country is still a result of that legacy of
Yes,
slavery, that legacy of racism, black codes, Jim Crow, all
right,
these things that we never really come to terms with.
right, right. Um, so thank you. That's what a powerful story,
Incredible. And I
Harvey.
thought a piece of my art when I was getting ready for the show, I thought
Yeah.
metaphor for moral injury.
Ah, wonderful, wonderful. Listening to you, the first thing that really strikes me um, is that yes, people really need, and it's such a kind of universal part of human experience, the need for there to be honest and authentic expressions of communal grief.
Yes,
This is a really deep, I think, universal human need. We really do need that.
right.
You experienced that. And
Yeah,
you're also talking about the way in which that experience is in such contrast to the way that Memorial Day often takes
yes,
place.
right,
Not authentic, which does not create that space for the expression of really deep, painful grief. Uh,
right.
and and the I too was doing a little bit of thinking in preparation for today and going back to some of the things that I've written in the past and some notes um and I did really, my own understanding was really expanded years ago around the importance of the Civil War in the development of all of this, that the losses of the Civil War were so massive,
Yes,
so overwhelming that the devastation that people experienced was so just beyond the imagination. There were various kinds of developments that grew out of this need for expression of that grief and
yes,
and the seeking of various forms of support. Um, Actually, I think the origins of what today we think of as Thanksgiving go back to that same period of time. And
mm,
Thanksgiving, this was something I think that President Lincoln um, inaugurated at a particular point in time, Thanksgiving as a way for people to come together and share those kinds of expressions of grief. Um, but you know, I was also and there's a wonderful book by a historian, Drew Gilpin Faust. This this something of suffering, this I don't think it's community. I'm missing the second word.
hmm,
This republic of suffering, that might be what it is.
hmm,
The name of her book. She explored the consequence of the depth of these losses and what it meant for certain kinds of nationalism that came to
Yeah.
the after that period. And one of the things that happened is that the rhetoric of sacrifice became much more predominant after that time
Hmm.
in the memorializing. And it's not that it's not that it wasn't around before. It's always been around
Yeah.
as long as there's been war, I think.
Yeah.
But it really took hold after the time of the Civil War and became a much stronger part of US culture in terms of thinking about the meaning of the military and particularly military losses. And there are
Yes.
all kinds of consequences for the nation as a result of that. So, it's really, as I was getting ready for today, I was thinking about really two different two things that are in conflict with one another, it seems to me. One being the way that Memorial Day generally tends to be commemorated, which is, as you both have been saying, and particularly commoditized, shallow, uh,
Trivialize.
trivialized, yes, um, entertainment driven,
Hmm.
profit driven
Yeah.
ways, right? And then this really kind of very deep-seated need that is universally human that your story really exemplifies. And what's also really interesting about your story, Harvey, is that here is a case where the the experience of communal grief was wide enough to incorporate Black experience. And that is not always the case. I mean,
Right.
that we one of the issues with Memorial Day has to do with the way in which the narratives and the rituals of Memorial Day focus grief like a laser in particular directions that leave out all kinds of people, communities, nations, losses, so that our experience in this particular pathway are all that we see, are what we focus on, are what become really important to the invisibility of so much else.
Hmm.
And your experience was one that kind of broke through that, it sounds like, in a
Yeah,
really
it
beautiful
felt
way.
that way to me. It really did.
That's really powerful.
Hmm.
Um, I'm yeah, I'm so glad you were able to experience that and how wonderful for the community that's been able to keep that alive and
Right.
and really nurture that deeper, authentic and much more expansive